3. True Walmart Horror Stories. Story 1. The Overnight Stalker, Part 1. My name is Brandon, and I was 24 years old when this happened. I worked the overnight stocking shift at a Walmart in Columbus, Ohio. It was a Wednesday night, 3:15 a.m., and I was alone in the toy aisle, placing action figures on shelves. The store was closed to customers, but there were about 15 employees scattered throughout the building. That is when I heard footsteps in the aisle behind me. I turned around expecting to see a co-worker, but the aisle was empty. I went back to stocking. The footsteps started again, closer this time, right behind me. Before I continue, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below, because what was stalking me through that store still haunts my dreams. Part 2. I had been working at that Walmart for about 2 years. Started as a cashier, but transferred to overnight stocking after a few months because the pay was better, and I liked working when the store was quiet. No customers to deal with, no screaming kids, no long liners at the register. Just me, my earbuds, and pallets of merchandise to unload. The store was one of those massive supercenters, opened 24 hours, but with reduced staff after midnight. During my shift, which ran from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., the store was technically open, but barely functional. A skeleton crew manned the registers, and the rest of us worked the floor restocking shelves and cleaning up the mess left behind by the day shift customers. The building was enormous. Over 200,000 square feet of retail space, divided into dozens of departments. Electronics, clothing, groceries, home goods, toys, automotive. It was easy to feel isolated, even when you knew there were other employees somewhere in the building. You could go hours without seeing another person. That Wednesday night had been routine. I clocked in at 10, grabbed my pallet jack and started pulling merchandise from the back room to the sales floor. By 3 a.m., I was in the toy department working my way through a pallet of action figures and board games. The toy aisle was at the back of the store, near the restrooms and the layaway area. It was one of the more isolated sections, especially at night. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the colorful packaging. I was kneeling on the floor, placing a row of action figures on the bottom shelf, when I heard the footsteps. Part 3. They were soft, almost hesitant. The sound of someone walking slowly down the adjacent aisle, their shoes scuffing against the polished floor. I paused and listened. The footsteps stopped. "Hello," I called out. "Someone there?" No response. I shrugged and went back to work, probably just another stalker passing through. The store was big and sound, carried strangely through the empty aisles. A few minutes later, I heard them again. This time, they were closer. It sounded like someone was in my aisle now, walking toward me from the far end. I stood up and looked. The aisle was empty. Rows of toys stretched towards the front of the store, undisturbed. No one was there. But I had heard footsteps. I was certain of it. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to my co-worker Darius, who was working in electronics. "You in the toy section?" His reply came a minute later. "Nope, been in electronics all night. Why?" I didn't respond. I told myself I was being paranoid. Old buildings made strange noises. Maybe a product had fallen off a shelf somewhere, and I had mistaken the sound for footsteps. I went back to stocking, but I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched. Part 4. Over the next hour, it happened 3 more times. I would be working focused on my task, and I would hear footsteps, sometimes in the adjacent aisle, sometimes right behind me. But every time I looked, no one was there. By 4 a.m., I was genuinely unsettled. I decided to take a break and walk to the front of the store where the overnight cashiers were stationed. I needed to be around other people. I was walking through the home goods section when I heard something different. Breathing. Not footsteps. Breathing. Heavy, ragged breathing coming from somewhere very close. I stopped and listened. The breathing continued slow and rhythmic, like someone who was winded from exertion. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the aisles around me. Shelves of towels and bedding, decorative pillows, bathroom accessories. Nothing out of place. Then I looked up. The ceiling in that section was high, with exposed ductwork and fluorescent light fixtures hanging down on chains. And above the shelves, where the storage area extended over the retail space, there was a dark gap between the top of the merchandise and the ceiling. Someone could fit up there, I realized. If they were thin enough, they could crawl along the top of the shelves, hidden in the shadows, watching the floor below. I stared at the darkness above the shelves. For a moment I thought I saw movement, a shifting of shadows, like something pulling back from the edge. Then the breathing stopped. I ran. Part 5. I found Darius in electronics and told him what was happening. He looked at me like I was crazy, but he agreed to come back to the toy section with me and check it out. We walked through the store together, scanning the aisles, looking for anything out of place. Everything seemed normal. The shelves were fully stocked, the floors were clean, and there was no sign of anyone hiding in the rafters. "I think you're just tired, man," Darius said. "This shift messes with your head sometimes." Maybe he was right. I had been working overnight for 2 years, and the lack of sleep definitely took a toll. Maybe I was hearing things that were not there. We went back to our respective sections. I tried to focus on my work, but I could not stop looking up at the ceiling, watching for movement in the shadows. At 5:30, I finished my section and headed to the back room to clock out for my break. The back room was a massive warehouse space behind the sales floor, filled with pallets of merchandise forklifts and storage shelves that reached almost to the ceiling. I was walking through the receiving area when I heard it again. Footsteps behind me, matching my pace exactly. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I turned around, and this time I saw him. Part 6. He was standing about 30 feet away, partially hidden behind a pallet of box televisions. A man thin and dirty, wearing clothes that looked like they had not been washed in weeks. His hair was long and matted, and his eyes were fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Who are you?" I shouted. "What are you doing back here?" He did not respond. He just stared at me, his head tilted slightly to one side. I reached for my radio to call for security, but before I could key the mic, he moved. He was fast. Faster than I expected. He darted behind the pallet and disappeared into the maze of shelving that filled the back room. I keyed the radio. "Security, this is Brandon in receiving. There's someone back here, a man. I think he's been living in the store." The response came immediately. "Copy that. Stay where you are. We are on our way." But I did not want to stay where I was. The back room was enormous, filled with hiding places. If he wanted to circle around behind me, he could do it easily. I backed toward the door that led to the sales floor, keeping my eyes on the shelves where he had disappeared. That is when I felt a hand on my shoulder. Part 7. I spun around my heart, nearly exploding out of my chest. It was Darius. He had come to find me when he heard my radio call. "You okay?" he asked. "You look like you have seen a ghost." "There is a man back here," I said. "I saw him. He ran into the shelving." Darius looked past me, scanning the back room. "I do not see anyone." "He is here, I swear." Security arrived a few minutes later. 2 guards, both looking skeptical. We searched the back room together, checking behind pallets, looking under shelves, even climbing up to check the upper storage areas. We found his nest about 20 minutes into the search. It was in a far corner of the receiving area, behind a wall of pallets that blocked it from view. A sleeping bag, food wrappers, empty water bottles, and a pile of clothes. Someone had been living back there for a while. But we did not find him. The store manager was called in. The police were notified. They searched the entire building, every storage area, every bathroom, every possible hiding spot. He was gone. Part 8. The police identified him through fingerprints left on the water bottles and food packaging. His name was Gerald Wayne Hicks, 53 years old, with a history of trespassing, stalking, and criminal harassment. He had been in and out of psychiatric facilities for most of his adult life. He had been living in our Walmart for at least 3 weeks. He would hide in the back room during business hours, then come out at night to roam the sales floor. The security cameras captured footage of him moving through the aisles at 2 and 3 in the morning, watching the overnight stockers work, following them through the store. The breathing I heard above the shelves was explained too. The police found evidence that he had been climbing onto the top of the shelving units, lying in the dark space between the merchandise and the ceiling, watching people below. He had been watching me for weeks, following me through the store, learning my routine. They caught him 3 days later at another Walmart about 20 miles away. He was trying to set up another nest in their back room. I quit my job the day after they found the nest. I could not be in that building anymore. Every time I walked through the aisles, I felt eyes on me. Every time I heard a footstep, I expected to see him standing there. I work at a warehouse now. Day shifts, lots of people around, plenty of security cameras. No more overnight shifts in empty stores. But I still think about him sometimes. The way he tilted his head when he looked at me. The way his eyes followed me through the darkness. And I wonder what would have happened if Darius had not put his hand on my shoulder that night. If I had been alone in that back room with him for just a few more minutes. Some questions are better left unanswered. Story 2. The Parking Lot. Part 1. My name is Victor, and I was 31 years old when this happened. I had stopped at a Walmart in rural Louisiana, about 60 miles west of Baton Rouge, to grab some supplies for a fishing trip. It was a Thursday evening around 8:45 p.m., and the parking lot was half empty. I was loading bags into my truck when I noticed a van parked a few spaces away. It had not been there when I went inside, and there was someone sitting in the driver's seat watching me. Not glancing, watching, with an intensity that made the hair on my neck stand up. If you have ever been hunted, you will understand what I am about to tell you. Subscribe now before I continue. because that van followed me for over 20 miles. Part 2. I was on a solo fishing trip to a lake about 2 hours from my house. My wife and kids were visiting her parents, so I had the weekend to myself. Just me, my truck, my fishing gear, and a cooler full of beer. I stopped at the Walmart to grab some last-minute supplies. Ice bait sunscreen, a few snacks for the road. The store was one of those older locations built in the 90s, with a parking lot that seemed too big for the building it served. Thursday evening was quiet. The lot was maybe 30% full, mostly cars clustered near the entrance. I had parked toward the back in a row by myself, because I did not like the doors hitting my truck. I was inside for maybe 20 minutes. When I came out, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the asphalt. The parking lot lights were starting to flicker on, but they were weak, barely cutting through the growing darkness. I walked to my truck, bags in hand, not really paying attention to my surroundings. That was my first mistake. When I opened the tailgate to load my groceries, I noticed the van. It was parked 3 spaces to my left, a white cargo van with no windows on the sides. The kind contractors use, or plumbers, or people who do not want anyone to see what is inside. The van had not been there when I went in. I was certain of that. I'd parked in an empty row. Someone was sitting in the driver's seat. A man, from what I could tell, though the tinted windshield made it hard to see clearly. He was not moving, not looking at his phone, not doing anything, just watching me. Part 3. I loaded my bags quickly, trying not to show that I had noticed him. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe he was just resting before driving home. But something about the way he was sitting, the way his head was turned in my direction, set off alarm bells in my head. I closed the tailgate and walked to the driver's door. As I climbed into my truck, I glanced over at the van one more time. The man was still watching, and now I could see his face more clearly. He was maybe 50, with a gaunt face and a shaved head. His expression was blank, unreadable. But his eyes were fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I started my truck and pulled out for the parking space. In my rearview mirror, I saw the van's headlights turn on. I told myself it was a coincidence. He was leaving at the same time. It did not mean anything. I pulled out of the parking lot and turned onto the highway. The van pulled out behind me. I drove for about 5 minutes watching my mirror. The van stayed behind me, maintaining a constant distance. I sped up. The van sped up. I changed lanes. The van changed lanes. He was following me. Part 4. My heart started pounding. I was on a rural highway, at least 15 miles from the nearest town. The road was dark, bordered by dense forest on both sides. If something happened out here, there would be no one to help. I reached for my phone and called 911. 911, what is your emergency? My name is Victor. I am driving westbound on Highway 190, somewhere around mile marker 40. There is a van following me. White cargo van, no windows. I think the driver was watching me at a Walmart, and now he's been behind me for the last 5 minutes. The dispatcher asked for more details. I gave her everything I could, the make and model of the van, the partial plate number. I had managed to catch the description of the driver. Officers are being notified. Can you tell me your current location? I looked for a mile marker. Coming up on mile marker 42, there is a gas station about 5 miles ahead. Should I stop there? Yes, pull into a well-lit area and wait for officers to arrive. Do not get out of your vehicle. I kept driving the van still behind me. The gas station appeared on the horizon, a small building with bright lights and a few cars parked out front. I put on my turn signal and pulled into the lot. The van did not follow. I watched in my rearview mirror as it drove past the gas station, continuing down the highway and disappearing into the darkness. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Then my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Nice truck. Part 5. I stared at the text, my blood running cold. He had my phone number. How did he have my phone number? I looked around the gas station lot, scanning for any sign of the van. It was gone. The highway was empty. But he had my number. He had taken the time to find it somehow, and he had texted me. I called the number back. It rang once and went to a recording. The number you have dialed is not in service. A burner phone, untraceable. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. I showed them the text, explained everything that had happened. They took my statement and said they would look into it. But without a clear crime being committed, there was not much they could do. He did not threaten you directly, one of the officers said. Following someone on a public road is not illegal. The text is creepy, but it is not a threat. I wanted to argue, but I knew he was right. The man had not broken any laws. He had just watched me, followed me, and sent me a text message. But I knew in my gut that this was not over. I called my fishing trip off and drove home instead. I took a different route, checking my mirrors, constantly watching for white vans. When I got home, I locked every door and window. I barely slept that night. Part 6. The next morning, I woke up to another text from a different unknown number. Your wife has pretty hair. Tell her I said hi. My wife was in another state, visiting her parents. How did he know about her? I called the police immediately. This time, they took it more seriously. Threatening texts, knowledge of my family, this was escalating. They traced the number to another burner phone purchased with cash at a convenience store 200 miles away. No way to identify the buyer. I called my wife and told her to stay at her parents' house, not to come home until this was resolved. She was scared, confused, asking questions I could not answer. Over the next 3 days, I received 6 more texts. Each one revealed something new about my life. The make and model of my wife's car, the name of my daughter's school, the address of my workplace. He was not just following me. He was researching me, building a file. The police set up surveillance on my house. They had officers watching the street, monitoring for suspicious vehicles. On the 4th night, they caught him. Part 7. He came in the middle of the night, around 3 a.m. He parked his van 2 blocks away and walked to my house on foot, carrying a backpack, and what the officers later described as a kit. The officers intercepted him in my driveway. He did not resist. He just smiled and said, "I was wondering when you would show up." His name was Douglas Eugene Park, 54 years old. He had a history of stalking convictions in 3 different states. He'd spent time in prison twice, both times for terrorizing women who'd rejected his advances. But I was not a woman, and I had never met him before that night at Walmart. When the police asked him why he had targeted me, his answer was chilling. I saw him in the parking lot. Something about him reminded me of someone I used to know. someone who wronged me a long time ago. He had fixated on me because I reminded him of someone else. Some old grudge, some ancient wound that I had nothing to do with. The kit in his backpack contained rope duct tape, a knife and a handgun. The officers said I was lucky. If they had not been watching my house, if Douglas Park had made it to my door, things would have ended very differently. Part 8. Douglas Park was charged with stalking, harassment, and possession of a weapon with intent to commit a felony. He is currently serving 15 years in a Louisiana state prison. But the terror he inflicted did not end with his arrest. For months afterward, I jumped at every sound. I checked my mirrors obsessively when I drove. I installed security cameras around my house and paid for a professional monitoring service. My wife did not feel safe in our home anymore. We moved to a different city, a different state, trying to put as much distance as possible between us and what happened. The thing that haunts me most is the randomness of it. I did not do anything to attract his attention. I just loaded groceries into my truck in a Walmart parking lot, and something about me triggered an obsession in a deeply disturbed man. It could have been anyone. It could have been you. 3 years have passed since that night. I still do not like parking lots, especially at night. I still scan the vehicles around me, watching for white vans for men who stare too long. And I still wonder sometimes if there are others like Douglas Park out there. Men who fixate on strangers for reasons that make sense only in their broken minds. Men who follow and watch and plan. If you ever feel like someone is watching you, trust your instincts. Get to safety, call the police, and do not let anyone tell you that you are overreacting. Because sometimes the feeling that you're being hunted is not paranoia. Sometimes it is survival instinct. Story 3. The Lie-Away Room, Part 1. My name is Terence, and I was 27 years old when this happened. I worked as an assistant manager at a Walmart in suburban Phoenix, Arizona. It was a Tuesday night, 10:30 p.m., and I was doing a final walkthrough of the store before closing. Most of the employees had gone home, and the building was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigeration units. I was checking the layaway room in the back when I noticed that one of the storage lockers was open. Inside was a sleeping bag, a pillow, and the remains of several meals. Someone had been living in our store, and based on the fresh food wrappers, they were still here. Subscribe now before I tell you what I found, because that night changed everything I thought I knew about safety. Part 2. I had been working at that Walmart for about 4 years, the last 2 as an assistant manager. The job was stressful, but rewarding. I oversaw the evening shift, handled customer complaints, managed inventory, and made sure the store was secure when we closed. Our location was in a busy shopping district, near several other big box stores and a movie theater. We were open from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m., which meant my shift usually ended around midnight, after all the closing procedures were complete. The layaway room was at the back of the store, past the electronics department and the photo center. It was a large storage area filled with metal shelving units and lockers where customers could store items they were paying off over time. During the holiday season, it was packed with televisions, gaming consoles, and bikes. In January, it was mostly empty. That Tuesday night, the store had been slow. Bad weather was keeping people home, and by 10 p.m., the parking lot was nearly empty. I sent most of the staff home early and did the closing walkthrough myself. The walkthrough was routine. Check every department, make sure no customers are still in the building, verify that all exits are secure. It usually took about 30 minutes. I was almost done when I reached the layaway room. The door was supposed to be locked at all times when the room was not in use. Only managers had keys, but when I tried the handle, it turned freely. Someone had either left it unlocked or had found a way to open it. Part 3. I pushed the door open and flipped on the lights. The layaway room looked normal at first glance. Metal shelves lined the walls, most of them empty. A few items waited in storage lockers tagged with customer names and payment schedules. Then I noticed the smell. It was faint, but unmistakable. Body odor mixed with the smell of food. Old food, like takeout, that had been sitting for too long. I walked slowly through the room, checking each aisle between the shelving units. Everything seemed in order until I reached the back corner. One of the larger storage lockers was open. Inside was not layaway merchandise. It was a living space. A sleeping bag was spread out on the floor of the locker. Next to it was a pillow, a backpack, and a pile of clothes. Empty food containers were scattered around along with water bottles, and what looked like a portable phone charger. Someone had been living in our layaway room. I stood there, staring at the makeshift camp, my mind racing. How long had they been here? How had they avoided detection? Then I heard a sound behind me. Footsteps, soft, cautious footsteps, coming from the direction of the door. Someone was still in the room with me. Part 4. I turned slowly, my heart pounding. A figure was standing near the entrance, partially hidden behind one of the shelving units. I could not see their face, just a silhouette backlit by the fluorescent lights in the hallway. "Who are you?" I called out. "This area is restricted. You need to leave." The figure did not respond. It just stood there, watching me. I reached for my radio to call for backup. The figure moved. It came at me fast, darting between the shelves, closing the distance before I could react. I saw a flash of movement, felt something hit my shoulder, and stumbled backward into the shelving unit. Boxes tumbled down around me. I threw up my hands to protect my face, and the attacker was on me, pushing me to the ground. It was a man. Young, maybe mid-20s, with wild eyes and a scraggly beard. He was thin, almost skeletal, and his clothes were filthy. "You should not have come back here," he hissed. His breath was foul, and his grip on my collar was surprisingly strong. I struggled against him, trying to push him off. "Let go of me. I am calling the police." He laughed. It was a hollow, desperate sound. "Go ahead. Call them. By the time they get here, I will be gone. Just like always." He pulled something from his pocket. A box cutter, the blade extended. "Now give me your wallet, your keys, and that radio, and do not try anything stupid." Part 5. I handed over my wallet and keys. The radio was clipped to my belt, and I fumbled to remove it, while he held the box cutter near my throat. "Good," he said. "Now stay down. Count to 100. If I see you before I leave, I will cut you." He stood up and backed toward the door, keeping his eyes on me. I stayed on the ground, watching him. He was almost to the door when I heard another voice. "Terence, you back here." It was one of my employees, a stock clerk named Miguel, who had stayed late to finish some tasks. He appeared in the doorway just as the attacker reached it. The man panicked. He slashed at Miguel with the box cutter, catching him on the arm, then shoved past him and ran. I scrambled to my feet and ran to Miguel. The cut on his arm was bleeding, but it did not look deep. "Call 911, I told him. "Now?" I left him with his phone and chased after the attacker. He was heading for the back of the store toward the loading dock. If he made it outside, he could disappear into the night. I radioed the front of the store. "Lock all exits. We have an intruder heading for the loading dock." Part 6. I caught up with him in the stockroom. He was trying to open one of the emergency exits, but the alarm had been triggered and the door was on a delay. He spun around when he heard me approach the box cutter raised. "Stay back. I will cut you. I swear." I kept my distance hands raised. "Just calm down. The police are on their way. There is nowhere to go." His eyes darted around the stockroom, looking for another way out. The loading dock door required a key code. The emergency exits were sealed. He was trapped. "You do not understand," he said, his voice cracking. "I had no choice. I lost my job, my apartment, everything. I just needed somewhere to sleep. I was not hurting anyone. You just attacked 2 people with a knife." His face twisted. "I panicked. You scared me. I just wanted to get out." I could hear sirens now growing closer. Help was almost here. The man heard them too. His expression changed, the desperation giving way to something darker. "If I am going down, I am not going alone." He lunged at me. I grabbed a pallet jack handle and swung it at his knife hand. The metal connected with his wrist and the box cutter went flying. He screamed and grabbed his wrist, and I pushed him to the ground. I held him down until the police arrived. Part 7. His name was Raymond Ellis Tanner, 26 years old. He had lost his job as a warehouse worker 3 months earlier and had been living on the streets ever since. He found our Walmart by accident. He came in one day to warm up and use the bathroom, and he noticed that the layaway room was often unlocked and unmonitored. He started spending nights there hiding when employees came by, slipping out during business hours to blend in with the customers. He had been living in our store for almost 6 weeks. The police found more than just a sleeping bag in his locker. They found notebooks filled with observations about the store's layout, the security camera blind spots, and the schedules of various employees. He had been watching us, learning our patterns, planning. The box cutter was not his only weapon. In his backpack they found a hunting knife and a collapsible baton. The detective who interviewed me later said that Raymond Tanner had a history of violent behavior. He had been arrested twice before for assault once, for threatening a former co-worker with a knife. If I had not found his hiding spot that night, if he had continued to watch and plan, who knows what might have happened. Part 8. Raymond Tanner was charged with assault, robbery, trespassing, and a handful of other offenses. He is currently serving 8 years in an Arizona state prison. Miguel recovered from his cut. It required 7 stitches, but there was no permanent damage. He told me later that he was glad he had stayed late that night. If he had not been there, if the attacker had made it outside, things could have ended much worse. The store implemented new security measures after the incident. The layaway room is now kept locked at all times with security checks every hour. Cameras were installed in areas that had been blind spots. Closing procedures were tightened. But none of that can erase what happened. For months afterward, I had nightmares about that layaway room. The smell of old food and body odor. The sound of footsteps behind me. The flash of the box cutter in the dim light. I do not work at Walmart anymore. I got a job at a corporate office somewhere with security guards and controlled access. Somewhere I do not have to walk through empty buildings at night, wondering if someone is watching from the shadows. The thing that haunts me most is how long he was there. 6 weeks. 6 weeks of living in our store, watching us learning our routines. We walked past his hiding spot every day, never knowing he was there. How many other stores have similar blind spots? How many other buildings have spaces where someone could hide, watching and waiting? The answer, I suspect, is more than any of us want to know. If you work in retail, please be careful. Check the spaces you normally ignore. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is, because you never know who might be living in the places you forget to look.